I think open source has really been a force for democratizing development, partly for what you say there, that they can just go try it out, and partly because the developers themselves are often helping contribute back to the system and so have a voice in those communities where they're contributing. It's not just about, you don't just go to the vendor and say, oh, please, Mr. Vendor, give me what I want. If the open source community is that you're getting stuff from doesn't have if their product doesn't have a feature you want, you can contribute that feature.
You can do that.
And get it back, right? That's, I think, a huge change in the way software is done.
Hi, this is Hadoop and Bhartiya, and I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors who make this show not only possible, but also a lot of fun. Being a sponsor of the show has its own benefits, including, but not limited to, appearing on the show itself. So if you want to become a sponsor, please check the details we have posted below. And now let's go ahead and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Hadoop and Bhartiya, and we are here in San Jose to cover Data Works Summit. And today we have Ellen, who also happened to be a co-founder of Hortonworks and is also architect. Not the same architect that you saw in the Matrix movie, but different kind of architect. So when we are talking about architecting and all those things, what did you do? I mean, when you founded, what happened?
How did we get here?
Yeah.
So I was actually part of the team at Yahoo that helped build Hadoop. My background then was in Pig. Well, my background before that, I'll back up even a little further even, is in relational query processing. I used to work for Informix way back in the day, worked for a few database startups you never heard of because they went nowhere. And then I worked for Yahoo building an internal database because we had what at the time seemed like I think it was 300 or 400 terabytes, which was an incredible amount of data back then. And there's no way we could afford to pay a commercial database for it, so we built our own. At some point I transitioned into the Hadoop team and started working on Pig. I didn't invent Pig, but that came out of Yahoo Labs, and the scientists who built it had published a paper on it, and people said, hey, this looks really interesting, let's make it real. And so that's when I and some of my colleagues joined the project and kind of took it from a paper and a proof of concept to a real project. That was also my first experience with open source, so it was an education on two dimensions at once, learning both Hadoop and open source. Worked there, I was in the Hadoop team there for 4 years working on Pig, and then eventually some HCatalog and Hive. Then came out and helped found Hortonworks along with a number of other members of the team, and have stayed involved in Hive. I actually wrote or helped write the ACID system inside Hive, the transaction manager, and some of those pieces. And been focused more lately on metadata and the data catalog and figuring out how to share that data catalog across systems so that you've got all these systems, Hive, Spark, streaming engines, everything working together. How do we make sure that they're all sharing the same metadata and not replicating it in different places throughout the system?
So is it like that Hadoop, Spark, and Mesos, they were like found at the same time or something? Because I met Ali, and then I met Ben Hinman, and then Arun. So is it like a gang of little?
A little bit. Most of us know each other. That's true. So Hadoop, as far as I know, is first. I don't actually know. I'm not exactly sure when Mesos started, but as far as I know, Hadoop was first. And you have to understand, at the beginning, Hadoop had only two things. It had a file system, HDFS, and MapReduce. That was it. And if you, no matter what job you want to do, you had to figure out how to fit it into MapReduce, which was challenging because not everything, MapReduce is really, really good for certain things and really bad for a lot of other things. And that's when Hadoop started working on what we now call Yarn, yet another resource negotiator. And that broke apart the notion of having just MapReduce from the scheduler. So you could run MapReduce, but you could run Tez or Spark or all these other things. Spark was started somewhere in there a few years after Hadoop as a kind of where Hadoop focused on, okay, we can always scale out, we can always get bigger. Spark focused on, we can always do it in memory. And we'll figure out how are we going to basically do this in parallel across machines, but always in memory. And when it first started, Spark was very good when it fit in memory and very not good when it didn't fit in memory. And over time, of course, they've improved that, just as Hadoop has improved being able to fit into memory when it needs to. Mesos, I think, came around the same time as maybe a little bit, I don't know if it was a little before or a little after Yarn, I'm not sure. But it was kind of that same idea of we're going to take this distributed system, but we're going to enable lots of things to run on it instead of just MapReduce.
Right. So when you look back at kind of history and you see the evolution, because we also saw the containerization at this, how do you see the evolution as the market dynamic is changing? Back in those days, now we have IoT and a lot of decisions are, we are living in a data-driven world today. So the market chemistry has changed. Its strategies are changing, as you were joking in the beginning. So how has Hadoop as well as Hortonworks evolved over time?
It's happening so fast, I don't even know if evolution is a fair word. No. Evolution takes millions of years, right?
Mutation is happening.
Yeah, it's almost, it's such a fast pace. I would, Hadoop kind of was the first, one of the early systems to say, okay, we can manage this amount of data and we'll break a bunch of the assumptions that existed before about fault tolerance and not that Hadoop isn't fault tolerant, but we'll embrace failure as part of the system and we'll work with that, and we'll fully distribute the file system and all these things. But as other people have come and contributed to that, what we would have once called Hadoop is now really a complete ecosystem. And that's why I actually think it is better that we call it big data, even though that's a bit of a buzzword. Or, a few years ago, we changed the name of this conference from the Hadoop Summit to DataWorks Summit. And that's really to stress that it's not all about Hadoop anymore. And I think that's what you would say about Hortonworks too, right? When we first began, we were very focused on taking Hadoop, and making it usable by the enterprise, right? Because what we saw at that time was people were struggling with, hey, there's Hadoop and there's Pig and there's Hive and there's Spark, and I don't know how to make all these work together. Help me. And so kind of at the very beginning, what we gave them was, okay, here's these projects bundled, tested together, all that stuff. Here's a platform for you. More and more, it's not about just managing data in your Hadoop cluster. It's about bringing data in, streaming it, also processing it on the edge, right? So a few years ago, we bought Anyara, which helped develop Apache NiFi, which we now use for edge processing and all that kind of stuff. So you see that kind of growth from being very data center centric to data wherever it is, and data in motion as well as at rest. Also, obviously the other huge thing changing, you mentioned containerization, but that kind of goes hand in hand with the whole cloud thing, right? And I think even people who aren't necessarily moving their data off-prem onto the cloud, even they're seeing that containers are the way to effectively manage your resources, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, right? So I would say all those things are causing changes in both the open source ecosystem and Hortonworks as a company very, very quickly.
As the new buzzwords are coming, they are not just buzzword. A lot of things are actually, the way people are deploying apps, or like serverless is a new buzzword, or you can see, but at the same time, it does solve a lot of purpose, especially when you're looking at driven. So how is Hortonworks, or Hadoop, the kind of keeping up with that? Because you have to respond to what markets wants. No strategies again. But from technology perspective, the challenges that you see.
Well, I would say there's two challenges. The first is actually helping people understand that they don't have to meet all the buzzwords, right? Because there is a little bit of a feel like, oh, I'm not using XYZ technology in this system. Is that a problem? It's like, well, does your system work? Does it do what you want it to do at a cost that's reasonable to you? Then don't worry about whether you're using this technology. And that's not to say that people are always wrong to check out new things, because they're not. But I think there can be, when buzzwords are hot, like you say, there can be this feeling, and we actually get customers coming to us and saying, we feel like we can't get started because every time we make a decision, somebody comes up with a new thing that we should have considered. And my answer to that is, well, don't listen. Like, figure out a solution that works at a price point that works and go with it. And don't worry about whether it's the cool thing on the block right now. That said, obviously, there is a lot of innovation going on. Containerization is a very real innovation, and it is changing the way people deploy their services. It's changing the way they process their data. I think, I don't remember who it was, one of the speakers, I think it might have been Rob from IBM, mentioned that more and more data will be processed on the edge because we can't, there's no use wasting bandwidth bringing it in, and not to mention that's too slow, right? If you want to make a decision quickly, you have to make it where the data is when it's happening, not bring it into your system and wait for some analyst to look at it and go, oh, that's a problem.
I mean, just look at cards, you don't have the time to send the data. At the same time, sometimes it is deployed at, let's say, a store, IoT devices are all the sensors there.
Yes.
And, and the latency will be there. And then privacy could be a big challenge.
It is a challenge, but it's
opportunity.
It's an opportunity,
and that's
right?
Always the case, yes.
And are we alone in pursuing those opportunities? Of course not. It's a huge market. There's going to be tons of competitors out there. But that's why we play the game.
Exactly.
Right? That's what, that's what fires our blood. We go and okay, this is our chance to compete. And yeah, we have to work hard, and we have to figure out which of those make sense for our customers, and then we have to build that into our system. And part of the beauty, though, of open source too is you don't have to build everything.
Exactly.
Right? Those of us who were in the original Yahoo team that helped build a lot of the core of Hadoop, and not that we built it all ourselves by any means, but we contributed heavily to it, and we have a lot of pride in that, and rightfully so, I think. And there's other projects along the way that we've contributed a lot to, but there's a lot of projects that others have started and that we now come and contribute to as well, but we didn't think of them ourselves, or we weren't the first movers in those, like Spark, right? Spark came out of the Berkeley labs, but we still can benefit in that, we can contribute to it, we can share that technology. So that's actually one of our huge strategies for dealing with this, is we can help our customers pick out which are the right tools to put in your bundle, bring those in, wrap around that the enterprise things like security and usability that aren't necessarily as much fun for the open source engineers, so they maybe don't spend as much time on, because frankly, engineers like to do the cool stuff, and making sure it's secure and usable and has a nice GUI and all that isn't always what engineers like to do. So that's that, I think, is kind of how we manage that.
You mentioned that companies they don't have to go out and try, but the risk that it poses is that then they might get left behind. I mean, that's why the biggest struggle that we are facing is that a lot of companies, they have a legacy, frameworks. At the same time, the beauty is that all of it is open source. You don't have to buy heavy, expensive licenses. You just go to GitHub, grab the code, and a developer can start playing with that. You don't have to spend a lot of resources. So that's one of the beauty, where you can play, and you should keep your toe, You should keep your toe, but you should also remember that your most expensive cost is likely your salaries, right? They are more expensive than technology.
Yes, and that's not to say you shouldn't play in it, because you should, and you should be experimenting. But I think the other thing, I kind of alluded to this when saying find the solution that works for you at your price point.
How do they know, unless they play with the technology, how do they know it's...
No, but I think you need to know beforehand what you're trying to achieve. You don't need to think about, okay, what's the very fastest I can do this job? It's how fast do I have to do this job? Let's take your example of maybe you're trying to do fraud detection on a credit card. How long do you have to respond to that query? Half a second, maybe 1 second. You can wait while the card's in the little slot. If you can build a system with the technology you have that does that, great. And if you miss some other technology that could have done it in 1/10 of a second, you still met what you said you needed to do. Engineering isn't about finding the very best way to do something, it's about finding the most economical way to do what you need to do, right?
Right.
So I think it's important that users sit down and figure out, okay, this is what I need. Now, what you're alluding to, and I think is very true, is people sometimes come up with complete paradigm shifting ways to solve things. And that, you can't plan for those kind of innovations. And, nobody doing physics in the 1920s could have realized, oh, Albert Einstein's about to sit down and write the theory of relativity and completely throw out everything we understand about physics. That's something, if you're blessed, your engineers are going to be the one to think about that, and if not, somebody else is, and you're going to have to follow. But I'm not sure you're going to solve that by having the latest, greatest tool.
Right, yeah, that never works that way. The only point is that since it's open source, so most probably your developer is already moonlighting and hanging out in GitHub at night either way. Yeah, so your point is also, both is valid. The number one is that it's not that expensive. It is expensive, but it's the same as open source, so you can play with it. But you're right, also you have to decide. Just because it's a hot new buzzword, that doesn't mean you should just jump.
You should do it.
That's very true.
But I do think you've got a good point too, that you need to let your developers keep playing with it, because that's what keeps them happy and excited, sharp, and tuned in. Yes, yeah, because they'll come to you sometimes and say, hey, there's a better way.
Right.
We didn't think about, because we only use the XYZ package to do this all the time, you don't know about this new package over here, this new product that will do it 5 times better, and it's cheaper and easier to deploy and secure and all those things. So I do agree, you need to let them, if nothing else, just keep them happy and engaged. You need to let them play with the new stuff.
Also, developers are the kings these days. The ages are gone where the trickle down, the decisions were coming from the top to bottom. Now it's coming from bottom to developer decide what technologies they use. And they have their own credit card. They can spin something in Amazon and just try it out and do that. So the whole point is open source enables that too.
Yes.
So you don't have to really sit down in a big meeting hall. Oh, we have to buy 3,000 licenses so you can try.
Yeah, no, I think open source has really been a force for democratizing development, partly for what you say there, that they can just go try it out, and partly because the developers themselves are often helping contribute back to the system, and so have a voice in those communities where they're contributing. It's not just about, you don't just go to the vendor and say, oh, please, Mr. Vendor, give me what I want. If the open source community that you're getting stuff from doesn't have if their product doesn't have a feature you want, you can contribute that feature.
You can do that.
And get it back, right? That's, I think, a huge change in the way software is done.
What is the relationship between Hortonworks and Hadoop and other technologies that you that rely on? And you have literally created some of those technologies.
So almost all the software we work on is actually...
What's your strategy?
Almost all our software is actually owned by the Apache Software Foundation. Not 100%, but most of what we work on is actually owned by Apache, and we contribute to those projects. Projects Hadoop, Spark, Hive, Kafka, these are all Apache projects. So that means that a third-party foundation actually owns this software, it's the communities inside that foundation that run it. Now, many of us play dual roles. I'm on the PMC for Hive, for example, and the PMC just stands for Project Management Committee. It's the group that decides what the project, direction for the project and that kind of stuff. And I shouldn't say it's not direction. We oversee the project and make sure the releases are good and those kind of things. But being open source, the direction is what it is. It just kind of goes. But it's important to us that software is open source on a couple dimensions, right? Because when people say open source, they mean different things. Open source can mean we'll let you see the code. It can mean we'll let you see the code and it has a license that says you can play with it, but we still own it. Or it means it's truly open, it's owned by somebody else. It has an open source license like GPL or Apache. And so that code isn't ours. We don't completely control it. And I think that's important to our customers because it gives them a knowledge that they can participate in those communities the same as we can. They gives them security regardless of what happens to us or any other vendor they're using. That software is out there, right? It's owned by Apache. And Apache is seen as a good neutral ground where everybody can cooperate. Obviously, in many ways, Cloudera is our competitor, right? But we cooperate with them all the time. I actually have been working on a project where I cooperated very closely with engineers and their team, and we're actually meeting regularly, which seems kind of funny in some ways.
No, it's not, because that's how open source works. Red Hat, SUSE, Canonical, their developers work together, whereas marketing people, they fight in the market.
Exactly, it's
Google
the same
and
thing.
Facebook and Twitter, they work together. Microsoft, Google works on Kubernetes, whereas they are the fiercest competitors. So you're right. But the beauty also is that whether it's your competitor or your competitor is paying the salary of the developer who is working on improving your code. That's the beauty of open source, the way I see it.
Yes.
So and nothing can beat it.
It's the only place I've ever had customers fix their own bugs. What more could you want?
The thing is, open source enables them. They transform from being a consumer and customers to contributors.
Yes.
It won't happen anywhere else.
Right? Yes.
So you're talking about that open source means different thing to different people. There's one more thing which is like depending on the license you choose, is that even if my source code is open source, someone else can take it and make it proprietary. And Apache kind of allows that.
It does allow that, yes.
So what's your opinion about that? I mean, I have strong opinions, but what's your opinion about that kind of model?
So there are licenses like GPL that you can't, you can still resell GPL, I think, but if you change it, you have to contribute it back.
Right.
Whereas Apache allows you to take it and do whatever, and you can resell it, you can change it.
As somebody who creates code,
okay.
Which kind of license do you prefer? Because Linus, when I talked to him, he said, I love GPL because the only thing that I care about is, if you're making any changes, just give it back to me. That's all I care about, So, what do you care about?
What do I care about? I care that people can pick it up and use it. So I'm not so worried about do they have to give it back. I'm really okay if they take it and do their own thing with it. It's fine. We still shared the code. Now,
but if they take it, they make some changes, and they don't give you back the changes, then you are locked out of. What do you think about it?
But the problem is they're the ones that are going to get run over. I've watched it happen over and over again.
That's where I was heading, the technical that they will create over time.
I don't know how many times I've seen it, and I won't name names, but major companies that you would know where they're like, well, we're going to quit contributing back. We're going to take Hadoop and we're going to fork it. And in 2 years, they're still on their version of Hadoop with the one special feature they couldn't wait for and bother to contribute back. And the rest of the community has just completely left them behind.
Right.
So I don't, I've never seen that work out where it's like, oh, they stole it from us and went off and made something 500 times better, and basically the open source community got left in the dust. Maybe I'm sure it's happened, but most of the time it's the people who fork who get run over.
Right.
Or, well, not really so much run over as left behind.
That's more or less like running, because then the whole point of using an open source component is defied. You're maintaining your own. You have paying developers and stuff like that.
And hundreds of people are contributing to some of these projects. Your budget is not going to keep up with that.
You can't. Yeah, exactly. And second thing is that also that there might be. You can have little bit of changes, but it could be like the salt in a
right
curry, not the. So it could be tiny bit, and that may not make a big difference. There are a lot of companies that use open source, but they also have their own proprietary components there. They don't give that back, but that's fine because it's like salt.
It depends on how you do it. If you're actually changing the component itself, then you're going to be every time there's a merge, it's going to be a mess for you.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's a lot of people that will take what they call the open core. The middle's free and they sell the pieces around. It's a very well-established business model. It's not one we at Hortonworks chose to take, but I understand that it's there. And the good thing there is people can still play with the core pieces, and then when they decide they're ready for the enterprise stuff, they can.
Earlier we talked about new technology like containerization and all serverless and all those buzzwords. Nowadays, Kubernetes is the biggest. I won't even call it. It's not a buzzword. Some people call it, the Linux of the cloud.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference, and Jim Zemlin was also there, and he said, somebody interrupted me and said, the Linux in the cloud is still Linux. Okay, Kubernetes is not Linux. But anyway, jokes aside, the point is that Kubernetes is kind of everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
How is it affecting your industry or your projects?
It's definitely affecting our projects. So let's back up first and just look at containerization, then we'll talk about the Kubernetes part. So containerization is obviously huge for us because it means that we need to work on making all these Hadoop and Friend projects work fine in containers. And some of them already do, and some of them have a little bit to go to get there. And part of that too is why you see in Hadoop 3 we're putting containerization in Yarn so that people can because people already have their Hadoop clusters, they have other things that they want to run that aren't necessarily part of the Hadoop ecosystem today. Put containerization on them, let them bring that in there easily. So that's kind of part one, make it easy for anybody to bring their containers in. Now the next part, make it easy for our stuff to run in containers. Obviously the cloud is already pushing us that direction. And I really think, my suspicion is more and more we'll see on-prem start to look like the cloud because it's just too hard to have two models, right? If it's like, because the reality is, people still have data in mainframes. People are still going to have data on-prem in 10 years. No matter how big the cloud gets, on-prem isn't going away, just like mainframes haven't gone away, right? And it's too hard for people to have multiple models. They're not going to want to think about, I'm writing this for the cloud, so I need to put it in a Docker container versus, I'm writing this for on-prem, so I need to write it as a Spark job or a traditional Spark job with no containers or whatever, right? They're going to want to write that the same way, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. And so I think you're going to see more and more of a push for that containerization side of Yarn, and even see more and more of a push for a lot of our stuff to run in containerization things like Kubernetes on-prem as well, right? And I think you already see that too in I talked about the containerization in Hadoop 3, but HDFS in Hadoop 3.1 or 3.2, somewhere in there, I'm not sure exactly, will introduce an object store called Ozone to enable object stores in your cluster. It's that same thing. We're seeing the push toward more and more the private on-prem is going to look like private cloud is going to look like public cloud.
I mean, this maybe is totally stupid, coming from me. But when we look at, even on-prem, you can have a private cloud, OpenStack. You can spin OpenStack and have a private cloud in your own data center. So you do have cloud, and then you can move. I mean, everybody talks about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So you're right,
It is, and some people are using OpenStack and are very happy with it. Some people haven't gone that route yet. So how many will go OpenStack versus how many are just going to set up Kubernetes with some kind of, like Ozone? We could use Ozone, or you could use one. There's plenty of object stores out there. Right. I don't know what that mix is going to look like, but I think from a developer viewpoint, what's going to matter is you're going to be thinking about, I have a container manager or container system, I have an object store, I have security protocols I have to manage, and it's up to the deployment team of, is this going on OpenStack, is this going on AWS, is this going on Google Cloud?
Right.
As a developer, I should be abstracted away from that.
As Kubernetes came to solve a particular problem, OpenStack came to solve a problem, Docker containers came to solve a problem. What is the big challenge that you're seeing in the big data or data space where you think this is still we need something like Docker or Kubernetes, or you're saying that Hortonworks has already solved the problem? You say, hey,
we've solved all the problems, man. I wish.
Big problem. You're like, damn, we still need.
The problem I see isn't, and I don't know of any one magic thing that's going to solve it, is how do you rope this together for people? When you've got innovation going so crazy and it, so many directions at once, which in one way is great, but on another side, I think can be hard because how do you make sure your security system is working with all those? How do you make sure your governance system that tells you what is personal and personally identifiable information that you don't want to let run away, how does it know how to talk to all these systems? How do I track data as it moves from piece to piece? It's those things that kind of wrap that together for the users to make sure that they get a consistent experience and consistent security and all those things across all their tools. That's what keeps me awake at night. How do you get all those things to work together in a way that's usable by the customer instead of them feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got so many things to manage. I just don't know how to approach using all these tools together.
And looking at the magnitude of the problem, I don't think you get any sleep at all.
I get some.
Okay, so since we have kind of talked about technology in general and we have moved to your sleeping habits, let's talk about something about you for a while. So when you're not building these, dystopian big data kind of Minority Report kind of projects, what do you do in your free time?
What do I do in my free time? I spend a lot of time reading.
Okay.
I'm kind of a little bit of a weird
that's not a nice word.
split personality kind of person where I love technology and I love that stuff, but I also I love philosophy and theology and history and those things, so I spend a lot of time, like my favorite YouTube channels are all these old history channels and those sorts of things. So I spend a lot of time reading, and then of course I have 2 boys, and so I spend a lot of time with the family doing those kinds of things as well.
So you read and you watch a lot of History Channel?
Well, not the History Channel.
History stuff.
History stuff on, I'm not a big...
What kind of history you're interested in?
Pretty, well, anything's kind of interesting, but I mostly find myself doing, Western civilization, especially thought, like history of philosophy, those kinds of things. Like I recently watched this really cool, there's this great YouTube channel called Extra Credit, which most people know them for their video games, but they actually also do history ones.
Are you sure you're not mixing this? You're actually a gamer, but you tell your wife that I'm just watching.
Yeah, honest honey, it's just history.
Yeah.
But they did this awesome series on the history of non-Euclidean geometry. And
I have no idea what it is, but it sounded good.
That kind of stuff is, that was a lot of fun. Those are the sorts of things that I like to spend my time on.
So do you just consume or you also contribute back? Do you also kind of create something around it? Or?
I have not started creating around it yet. I've been thinking that I need to, but it's, since my day job involves a lot of creative stuff, kind of by the time I get home in the evening,
you're drained. Yeah.
My creative juices are about done, but I've been thinking more and more that I need to stop just consuming there and start producing too.
Right. Yeah, you can start your own channel, YouTube channel, right?
I don't know if that would be my best choice. I think I might be a better writer than YouTuber, but we'll see.
Right. Yeah. Do you watch TV or not, other than those? Okay, so you don't watch Black Mirror or those kind of stuff?
I don't. I'm just not a big TV fan. The last TV show I was very into was Lost, and
yeah, I saw that too. Yeah,
and I'm still upset about how that ended. So
yeah, they kind of, I think, ending was lost.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And there were a lot of criticism, and a lot of shows ended like that. I was a big into Dexter, and the way
I didn't watch that one.
So sometimes if they can't handle it, just leave it like that. Just don't. Done. Yeah. Anyway, it was fun talking to you today. We talked about so many different things, and in the end, we just got lost that we were talking about. But it was fun talking to you today.
Thank you.
And hopefully, we'll see you again in the next conference.
All right. Hope so.
Thank you.